All right, welcome everyone to the first Service Mesh Day. My name is Varun. I am the founder and CEO of TETRATE, and thank you all for coming. This is the first industry conference focused on Service Mesh. I would like to thank all of you, our speakers, and most importantly, all of our sponsors, CNCF, ONF, and OpenStack Foundation, our diamond sponsor, Google Cloud, gold sponsor, Juniper Networks, silver sponsor, Capital One, bronze sponsors, Cloud Foundry Foundation, and AWS. So who all are here? Within the community here, there is end users, there is startups, there is cloud providers, there is 200 plus organizations which registered, and looks like quite a few showed up, so that's great. Super excited about it, so there's clearly interest in the space. But before we get into the amazing lineup of speakers, I just wanted to set context for the day, spend like just 5 minutes on this, as to what are we hearing about Service Mesh, why is it even an interesting area? So if you just step back from all the noise, what is happening in industry? It is compute's growing everywhere. Amount of compute is growing, the density of compute is growing. And this is numbers from one of the largest networking companies in the world, and their research from 2016 to 2021. So not just network storage, which is growing 27%, but correspondingly compute is growing, and compute density is growing, both in data center as well as cloud. So what does that mean? When you have lots of compute and distributed, what happens? Networking to connect, which is an n-by-n problem, is the one which is becoming extremely complex. And that's the space that we are here to talk about, networking. The other thing that's happening because of containers and microservices, and that's one of the factors why compute density is growing, is the promise of microservices is great. You move fast, every team runs at their own speed, but we all know that when you break one process into multi-processes, it's all of the networking problems. Commonly known 8 fallacies of distributed computing. We're all familiar with that. We can't assume a bunch of characteristics about the network. So how do we think about service mesh? So today you'll hear from stalwarts like Eric, who's the VP of Infrastructure at Google Cloud, Larry Peterson, who's the CTO for Open Networking Foundation, on how networking is moving to the application layer. The way we think of service mesh is an application-aware networking layer. And when I say applications, I mean everything. I don't just mean containers. I mean brownfield, greenfield, VMs, serverless functions, next thing that's yet to be discovered. So that's how we think about the space. So as complexity moves to network, there's a few concepts that we have to rethink. And you'll again hear from Matt will go over Envoy and Envoy roadmap, and how Envoy is one of those first proxies that thought about proxying to services, not IP addresses. You'll hear from end users of Envoy, like Yelp, Square, Salesforce. There's a bunch in this room who are deploying Envoy and thinking of services, not servers. You'll hear from cloud providers, Nick from AWS, Prajakta from Google Cloud, how they are putting in policy-based mesh into their public cloud environments to think about all traffic policies. You'll hear from end users like ING, who are thinking about putting security into application and thinking about app security, not perimeter security. So as you go through this, just day to day, I think you'll get a lot of the concepts conveyed into why, how the rethink is happening. So, but before we kick off the great agenda, I want to debunk a few myths about service mesh, which I call them myths because I think they're not real, but there's quite a bit of confusion around them. Myth number 1, you do service mesh after Kubernetes. So there's a talk today from one of the engineers at TETRATE, Dee and Prajakta, and they'll talk about how you do mesh before you adopt Kubernetes, why you do mesh to containerize and go from VM to containers. Myth number 2, which is it only works on containers. There was a reason when I was at Google, I personally and a bunch of others fought for Istio to be a separate project. And I still believe that's the right case. Service mesh can work equally well on VMs and containers. And there's a talk today from Sriram, one of the engineers at TETRATE, on how you work Istio natively, both on VM and containers. Myth number 3, it's hard to adopt. So my next slide, I'll cover how we are seeing adoption in steps. And I think that is how mesh is going to be adopted. So in terms of what we are seeing in terms of how people are starting to use service mesh is somewhat of a 3-step journey. Most people we are seeing are starting from ingress, which is step 1. Why is that? Primarily, it's an easier concept. It's less intrusive, a pattern that is known to people. You get to learn Envoy, and then you can take it all the way into individual services where you get into protocols and performance characteristics and all of the complexities. Step number 2 is when you take requests from ingress all the way to actual sidecar and actual running workload, which often called east-west traffic management. And step number 3, which you start to introduce security from all the way from ingress to the running workload. So that's what we are seeing in terms of probable adoption sort of path for service mesh. So with that, I think I'll take 30-second promotion preview for what TETRATE is up to. So a few weeks ago, we launched something called Get Envoy, which is a way for you to get certified compliant builds of Envoy. Now, for any end user to actually put Envoy in production, you need to have that peace of mind. You need to know it's secure, compliant, I can upgrade it, without which you're not getting it close to production. One other project, Skywalking. Wu Sheng, who is somewhere there, he's the author of Skywalking. It's an APM project done right for services. And I'm happy to note that it's graduating soon as a top-level Apache project, and something that he's worked hard to integrate with service mesh and Istios and those. And it's widely adopted in China. Something that I'm really, really excited about, which we actually announced an hour ago, is TETRATE Q. This is a fresh look at access control, which we are doing in collaboration with NIST. You'll hear from David. David's here somewhere in the room, back there. David and Ignacio will touch upon what this is, but this is thinking about access control for modern infrastructure. All right, so that's what we are up to. With that, I would like to invite our first speaker, Larry Peterson, who is, Larry is the CTO for Open Networking Foundation. He's a director for Stanford Platform Labs, also a professor at Princeton University. I think of him as the father of SDN, the guy who created SDN and NFV. And today, super excited to have him here to talk about how he thinks about future of networking in service mesh and multi-cloud world. So please welcome Larry.